At 6, back to the office and no masks in classrooms as England's COVID measures ease. It's the first stage of the government's move to drop Plan B measures completely at the end of next week. But with daily infections still running high, there is concern it'll put the NHS under even more pressure. Also on the programme tonight, the Prime Minister says he has no evidence of blackmail in his party after claims by one of his own MPs.
I've seen no evidence, heard no evidence to support any of those allegations.
Military drills in Ukraine as the United States warns Russia of grave consequences if any of its troops cross the border. The aftermath of the tsunami that hit Tonga, aid planes finally arrive in the South Pacific, bringing much-needed supplies. And how blisters put pay to the hopes of Britain's Emma Raducanu at the Australian Open.
And coming up on the BBC News channel, a different series but a familiar story for English cricket as England's women lose their opening match of their Ashes series.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. Some of England's Plan B measures have been scrapped today, with people being told they no longer have to work from home and secondary school pupils removing face coverings in class. From next Thursday, face masks will no longer be compulsory in most settings and COVID passes for large venues in England will be dropped. But there's concern that the move will increase pressure on the NHS, which is already under a lot of strain as waiting list backlogs continue to grow. In Wales, the latest figures show that more than a fifth of the entire population is now on an NHS waiting list. Here's our health correspondent, Dominic Hughes.
How many discharges have we got today? I'm thinking 4 on this list.
At the Royal Bolton Hospital, clinical staff, nurses and therapists are working with the local council to try and get patients back home.
Any issues? No? OK.
One reason hospitals are so busy is that some patients face significant delays in getting home, even if they're well enough to leave. And it's a complicated process.
There's so many services involved in one patient. There's equipment, there's package of care, there's access issues, there's family, there's transport. So we need to make medicines are ready for home. So we need to make sure everybody's on the same page and we're aiming for that discharge.
NHS England says 93% of all hospital beds are currently occupied. And the impact of COVID on staff and patients makes things even more complex.
We've been hit by workforce shortages for the last few months now. The Omicron wave has obviously affected that as well. We've also had to work really closely with our care homes. So our care homes have been managing outbreaks with their staff, unfortunately some with residents as well, and that has affected their ability to take people directly from hospital.
Even though the number of COVID infections is falling across the UK, hospitals remain under significant pressure, and those pressures can be seen right across the system, from accident and emergency departments to the amount of time people are having to wait for a cancer referral. Today, Wales has seen a record backlog of patients waiting for routine hospital treatment, more than 680,000 people. And NHS leaders in England say the months to come could be tough. But at the same time, as COVID restrictions in England are eased, the Health Secretary declared victory over the Omicron variant.
And today really is a new chapter in our fight against COVID-19 as we return to Plan A. And we said when we learned about Omicron, we needed to build the defences and we needed to buy time to do that. That was the purpose of Plan B. And if you look at the data now, it is in retreat.
Tens of thousands of office staff in England have already been encouraged to return to work. Next week we'll see the end of mandatory face coverings and COVID passes, as well as the return of nightclubs and large indoor events in Scotland, the relaxing of rules for hospitality in Northern Ireland, and a gradual easing of restrictions in Wales. But in some parts of the UK, particularly the north of England, infections are still very high, and health officials are concerned the relaxing of rules has come too soon.
Enabling full mixing without any mitigations such as wearing masks or social distancing will mean that there will be, sort of preventable transmission. It would have been slightly better that we'd got our case rates lower before we started to relax completely.
The health service remains under pressure, but the immediate threat of Omicron seems to be receding. Ministers have made a judgment call. The costs of restrictions now outweigh the benefits. Dominic Hughes, BBC News, Bolton.
Children in England's secondary schools no longer have to wear face coverings during lessons, and from next Thursday they won't have to wear them at all. But some head teachers have criticised the move as too sudden. They say they'll continue to tell students to keep masks on until they're certain infection rates are falling. Our education correspondent Elaine Dunkley reports.
Shirt.
At Chesterfield High in Crosby, there's a change in the school rules.
English next.
Across England, pupils no longer have to wear masks in class.
It steams up your glasses. I keep on having to take my glasses off if I'm wearing my mask.
Every time you look down and writing, your mask just falls down and then you have to think, oh, I've got to put it back on my nose, and it just distracts you.
Morning, everybody.
This head says it's another announcement from the government at short notice.
Personally, I would have carried on wearing masks in classrooms till the half term and then actually retested everyone after half term, and then at that point you could have actually started to move into spring not wearing masks.
Face coverings are still needed in communal areas.
Girls, have you got masks?
From next week, they'll no longer be required in schools in England. For this maths teacher,
I have 5 classes of 30. They're all different contacts, they're all different households.
The risks haven't gone away.
I know how useful it can be to have any mitigation that we can to allow pupils to stay in classrooms as much as possible and to allow teachers to be in classrooms.
The original expression was all in terms of X.
The government says the decision to remove masks in class is in response to a fall in the number of COVID cases.
Second week back in, somebody tested positive, so our year went off.
These sixth formers are about to sit their A-levels and don't want to take any chances.
So when we were supposed to be sitting our GCSEs, obviously they got cancelled. How am I going to do in these exams? Because it's like I've never done them before. I have like a proper exam, especially because they're A-levels. You really need to do well because you've got uni offers to get.
In my family, we've recently just had COVID. I didn't want to miss any more school with exams coming up, so my face mask's going to stay on.
Ready, go!
In Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, the guidance is still to wear masks at all times. Removing masks in classes in England may feel like a milestone.
Where's your mask?
But for those in education, it doesn't take away the disruption many schools are still facing.
Come on, girls, let's go.
Elaine Dunkley, BBC News in Crosby.
The latest figures show the number of people testing positive for coronavirus continues to fall, with just over 107,300 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. On average, just under 93,000 new cases were reported per day in the last week. The number of people in hospital with COVID has fallen again to just under 18,500. There were 330 deaths reported in the latest 24-hour period. That's the people who died within 28 days of a positive test, though there will be some amongst this number who won't have died from COVID. On average, in the past week, 266 deaths were announced every day. On vaccinations, just over 36.5 million people have now had a booster jab, which means nearly 64% of people aged 12 and over have now had 3 vaccine doses. Boris Johnson says he hasn't seen any evidence to back up claims from a senior Conservative MP that the government has attempted to blackmail colleagues who are opposing him. William Ragg, who's one of those calling for the Prime Minister to resign over lockdown parties at Downing Street, said rebels had faced pressures and intimidation. Westminster is waiting for the report into lockdown parties by the senior civil servant Sue Gray. Here's our political editor, Laura Kunsberg.
If it's not one thing but turns out to be another.
How will it turn out?
We can direct refer them.
For weeks, the Prime Minister has been having to explain himself.
So what's this?
And what happened in number 10 during the pandemic
Order.
made some of the public and his own MPs mad. But there are claims now too. His team have been intimidating Tory backbenchers who want to speak out.
I've seen no evidence, heard no evidence to support any of those allegations. And what I'm focused on is what we're doing to deal with the number one priority of the British people, which is coming through COVID. And we've made enormous progress thanks to the vaccine rollout.
Back at Westminster, there's nothing unusual about MPs being subject to some pretty strong persuasion. In dark corners, around the corridors of power, party bosses work to keep backbenchers in line. But in front of the cameras this morning, a Tory critic of Boris Johnson said it's gone far too far.
A number of members of Parliament have faced pressures and intimidation from members of the government because of their declared or assumed desire for a vote of confidence in the party leadership of the Prime Minister. The reports of which I'm aware would seem to constitute blackmail.
The claims have raised eyebrows.
William Ragg's warning is probably timely, and I would very much hope that it will be heeded.
In both ways.
It's complete nonsense, it's attention-seeking behaviour, and it's disappointing.
Businesses.
This brand new Labour MP, a defector,
The Labour MP from Bury South, Christian Wakeford,
says when he was still a Tory, he was warned his constituency would lose out if he didn't vote a certain way.
I was threatened that I would not get the score for Radcliffe if I didn't vote one particular way. How do you feel when holding back a regeneration of a town for a vote? It didn't sit comfortably, and that was really that kind of starting to question my place where I was.
Politics is not for the faint-hearted. Conversations behind closed doors can be brutal. But what today's argument shows is the boiling tension inside the Conservative Party, fighting while everyone awaits the official verdict into what really happened in number 10 during lockdown. But one conclusion is perhaps already being drawn. A member of the Cabinet publicly admitting today that this saga is damaging our democracy. And the doubts about Boris Johnson's leadership run deep.
If this particular episode passes, there are still big changes that need to happen. Downing Street is not being run in the way that most of us would like to see. I think there needs to be a change in both the culture and the structure of Downing Street.
Much may stand between Boris Johnson and any exit, yet with a bright light shone on his government's conduct and character, the omens do not look good. And Sophie, that report, which is meant to give the full story into what happened in number 10 in lockdown, is expected at some point next week. A moment of real jeopardy for the Prime Minister, expected to be decision time for many Conservative MPs.
Laura Kunsberg in Westminster, thank you. The Prime Minister has said any Russian incursion into Ukraine would be a disaster for both countries and the world. The US Secretary of State has been meeting European counterparts in Berlin to try to coordinate Western strategy. Around 100,000 Russian troops are gathered on the Ukraine border as President Putin insists Ukraine should never be allowed to join NATO. Today, the first members of a 30-strong British military team arrived in Ukraine to help train their forces in the use of anti-tank weapons supplied by the UK. Here's our diplomatic correspondent, Paul Adams.
American diplomacy is in high gear. Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, arriving in Berlin this morning for talks with European ministers, looking for signs of unity among America's allies and appealing directly to the Russian people not to go to war.
You deserve to live with security and dignity, like all people everywhere. And no one, not Ukraine, not the United States, not NATO or its members, is seeking to jeopardize that. But what really risks your security is a pointless war with your neighbors in Ukraine, with all the costs that come with it.
Fresh satellite images appear to show the extent of Russia's military buildup close to Ukraine, now in excess of 100,000 troops, with more on the way. Russia still insists it has no plans to invade, but Ukraine's defense ministry today released pictures of its soldiers practicing with multiple rocket launchers close to Russian-annexed Crimea. In eastern Ukraine, where pro-Russian separatists have been in charge since 2014, there's a sense that conflict is looming. Russian Donbass, the sign proclaims. The West fears Moscow may try to expand its influence, pushing beyond areas already in rebel control. The scars of this frozen conflict are everywhere. 72-year-old Antonina Zaitseva lives close to the front line in a world ravaged by years of shelling and sniping. It's a miracle we stayed alive, she says. We could have died many times. She's pro-Russian and fears a full-scale war. The site of Russia's ominous buildup. As the troops and armour assemble, the question remains, what exactly does Vladimir Putin intend to do? Paul Adams, BBC News.
The Community Secretary, Michael Gove, has met developers today and urged them to pay more for work to remove dangerous cladding from blocks of flats and to rectify building safety issues. The move comes in the wake of the Grenfell Tower fire and will cost developers billions of pounds. Almost 5 years after the tragedy, 40% of tall tower blocks with flammable Grenfell-style cladding have yet to be made safe, despite money from the government's £5 billion Building Safety Fund. There are also nearly 1,000 tower blocks with other types of dangerous cladding which need fixing, as Sarah Corker reports.
Hi, I'm Ali.
My name is Stephen.
I'm Tamaya.
My name's Will. I'm a leaseholder of a flat in Sheffield.
No work has started and no funding has been confirmed
Due to ongoing delays with the Building Safety Fund.
We don't know when the remediation is going to start.
And 4 years on, these problems are still not fixed. The building is still unsafe.
Flat owners from across the country have shared their stories with the BBC. Those trapped in unsafe, unsellable homes say it's taking too long to remove dangerous cladding. The government has set aside billions to remove cladding. Figures analysed by the BBC show that 60% of tower blocks with Grenfell-style cladding have had work fully completed. It's lower for private sector buildings. Less than half have been finished and signed off as safe. For other types of dangerous materials known as non-ACM cladding, progress has been slower. Nearly 1,000 blocks have been approved for funding, but so far just 18 have been completed. That's less than 2%. The government says a series of measures have been taken to make sure that the work is carried out quickly and safely. The Housing Secretary met with developers today to urge them to come up with more money to pay for the work to get done. In Salford, these 9 blocks weren't eligible for government funding. The management company removed the cladding, but problems continue.
They took it off and left us.
And how long has it been like this?
It's been like this 3-4 years.
Inside, residents say their homes are freezing cold and energy bills are soaring.
So as soon as it gets cold and you've got no cladding on to keep the warmth in, you might as well get your money and flush it down the loo. It's warmer in the lobbies outside the landings than it is in here. You can see your breath.
A floor up, I met the Vautry family. They've been told it'll be 2024 before the work's finished.
We've got a 4-year-old. It's not fair. None of this is fair on her.
She don't understand. She just wants it to be warm. We average about £120 a week wages.
Yeah.
And we're putting like £40-50 a week of that in the electric. And we're all sat here with jumpers and coats and tracksuits.
The company managing these flats for the council has apologised for delays and says residents are receiving financial help with energy bills. Industry experts, though, warn remediation works are complex.
There aren't enough people and there aren't enough materials to do all this remediation work. And even if there were, the hardening of the insurance market means it's extremely difficult for companies to get insurance to do the work.
The longer it takes to fix these buildings, the more money drains away from those who can least afford it. Sarah Corker, BBC News in Salford.
The time is almost 6:20, our top story this evening. No masks in classrooms and back to the office as England's COVID measures ease ahead of Plan B being dropped completely next week. And coming up, after 260 hours in the air, 19-year-old Zara Rutherford becomes the youngest woman to fly solo around the world.
Coming up in Sports Day on the BBC News channel, beaten in the second round of the Australian Open, Andy Murray reflects on the bitter disappointment of his early exit in Melbourne.
Pictures are emerging of the devastation in Tonga caused by the eruption of an undersea volcano and tsunami at the weekend. Today, the first aid planes landed with urgently needed drinking water, food and medicines. The Queen has said she's shocked and saddened by the destruction to the Pacific nation, which is part of the Commonwealth. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes reports.
For the first time since last Saturday's huge eruption, we're finally getting to see what has happened to Tonga's main island. Along the coast, the damage from the tsunami looks extensive, with many buildings destroyed. In Tonga's capital, Nuku'alofa, there's a lot of volcanic ash, but the buildings are intact and the cleanup has begun. Telephone services are also back, and that means for Tongans living abroad, the agonising wait for news is finally over.
My dad had told me that, they're fine, no major damages to our homes.
So at the moment, I've got family over in the outer islands of Ha'apai. I have heard from them and they're doing okay. Who I haven't heard from is my father. I'm sure he's out there working hard, doing what he does.
We've also learned of a remarkable survival story. This man says he was swept off a small island by the tsunami and was in the water for more than 24 hours before making it to land. Help is now arriving. This is an Australian C-17 transport plane on final approach to Tonga this afternoon. The crew quickly unloaded water and emergency supplies, but because of COVID, they were not allowed any contact with locals. Tonga's government has decided that until COVID is over, the islanders will have to deal with the aftermath of this disaster by themselves. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News, in Tokyo.
A report commissioned by the Catholic Church has found that the former Pope, Benedict XVI, failed to act over 4 cases of child sex abuse when he was the Archbishop of Munich in Germany. Lawyers who investigated the historical allegations say Pope Benedict, then called Joseph Ratzinger, allowed priests who were criminally convicted of abuse to continue working for him. Pope Benedict denies the accusations. A 33-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murdering an elderly woman in an attack in Derbyshire which left her husband with life-threatening injuries. 86-year-old Freda Walker was found dead at her home in Langworth Junction on Saturday. Her 88-year-old husband Kenneth Walker remains in hospital in a critical condition. BT has announced price rises of 9.3% for its broadband and phone services following a dramatic increase in data usage over the last few years. The company said that customers would be paying an extra £3.50 a month on average from the 31st of March. A public apology to victims and survivors of historical abuse in institutions in Northern Ireland will be given in March. The devolved government announced the date today, exactly 5 years after a public inquiry report documented physical, emotional and sexual harm to children between 1922 and 1995. Campaigners say many victims have died waiting for the authorities to say sorry, even though the inquiry recommended an apology. This report from our Ireland correspondent Chris Page contains some distressing stories.
Brian O'Donoghue has spent 20 years writing a memoir of 6 decades ago.
Brother Stephen is in charge of the boys down at the swimming pool. He's throwing little Billy, who is just a bit younger than me, into the pool. The brother thinks it's great fun. Billy doesn't. He can't swim.
That happened at Ruban House in County Down, which was run by a religious order. Brian remembers vividly how 2 boys were punished in front of all the others after they tried to escape.
The only protection from a beating would have been a pair of swimming trunks. And they were beaten on the backside and thighs until they jumped in the air and screamed. There was sweat pouring off him when he beat them.
Sexual abuse was also common. Brian recalls trying to protect himself.
Don't put yourself in a position where you're alone with them. And but then again, that can be hard if a brother actually comes in and lifts you out of your sleeping bed and takes you to his room.
Across the Irish Sea, abuse survivors are also living with unspeakable trauma. Kate Walmsley was in an institution in Londonderry.
From I was 8 to I was 12, I was being sexually abused by a priest there. I'm lonely and still feel that I don't belong anywhere and I'm not accepted unless, you know, I try and fit in everywhere I can, but, you know, it's always you're not wanted.
It's 5 years since a public inquiry recommended a state apology.
That was something that a lot of our people really wanted, even before compensation. What they wanted to hear was someone to say, sorry, it wasn't your fault, it was our fault.
The process has been long, not least because the devolved government collapsed for 3 years. But now ministers have agreed to hold an event to formally apologise.
Lots of our victims have passed and not had an apology. All I wanted was someone to say sorry.
After generations of hurt, a day of acknowledgement is coming. Chris Page, BBC News.
And details of organisations which offer information and support are available at bbc.co.uk/action line, or you can call for free at any time to hear recorded information on 08000 155 998. A giant coral reef that is in pristine condition has been discovered off the coast of Tahiti. Coral reefs are among the ocean's most threatened ecosystems, but scientists say this reef appears to have avoided damage from pollution and rising sea temperatures because it's unusually deep underwater, around 30 metres beneath the surface. It's one of the largest discovered at that depth, which is known as the ocean's twilight zone. The scientists from the United Nations who found it say it's hoped there are many others waiting to be found. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have been to Lancashire today to meet people who've worked tirelessly to help others throughout the pandemic. In Burnley, they were introduced to Pastor Mick Fleming, who's been helping the homeless and even set up his own church, as Ed Thomas reports.
You see all these people, they have children, hungry children.
From feeding the hungry,
give us the strength and the courage to get through.
Consoling those in grief.
Come on. Come with me.
And providing hope for the lost in Burnley.
It's all right.
We spent 12 months filming with Pastor Mick.
Come and sit down here. Come and sit here. Come on.
As the pandemic exposed deep inequalities.
It's all right, John.
Oh, but I'm a dirty mess. And today, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge climbing the steps where so many have sought refuge. Royal recognition for Church on the Street.
People like you, caring, that's what really makes you from being good to a real success.
Did you see the BBC thing?
Weirdly, I saw the BBC thing long before you were even coming up, because for us it's more ideas, it's going to places and seeing how people do different like you said.
And what you can replicate in what's working.
What can you scale?
Free haircut, get my nails done.
The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge wanted to be here to meet volunteers and help those who had suffered during the pandemic. Families like Deacon's. His mother died during lockdown.
If we hadn't have been here, or something like us hadn't been here, I don't even think.
Do you feel we can talk about your mum? I lost my mum when I was 15. It's difficult. But it gets easier, I promise you. It's easier.
Just say, Lord, just bless this couple and everything they do in your name. It's given me massive hope, and they wanted to come here to support the work that we do, and that's colossal. That's colossal for us.
That report by Ed Thomas. Now, a 19-year-old has become the youngest woman to fly solo around the world. Zara Rutherford has landed in Belgium at the end of her journey, which began in August last year. She flew across more than 50 countries on her own, as Jessica Parker reports.
A smooth landing after a long journey. It takes time to fly around the world in a 300-kilo microlight. What was your scariest moment?
I got pretty close to a thunderstorm in Singapore, and so suddenly there was a lightning strike, and I think that was pretty scary. But otherwise, the mental challenges were definitely mostly over Siberia, because I'd be flying for hundreds of kilometers with just nothing human. And then I realized that if the engine were to stop, I would have a really big problem.
Both parents are pilots. Zara faced serious weather delays along the way, but she also saw the sights.
I'm in Nome, Alaska right now. And now I'm in Greenland, flying from Indonesia to Sri Lanka. I arrived in Singapore from Korea to Taiwan. I'm still in Greece. And I'm in Russia. It's pretty cold.
Zara wants to encourage more girls and women into aviation. Her dream is to become an astronaut. The sky isn't even the limit. Jessica Parker, BBC News in Belgium.
Tennis now, and both of Britain's Grand Slam winners, Andy Murray and Emma Raducanu, have been knocked out of the Australian Open in the second round. Our sports correspondent Natalie Perks was watching.
A morning treat, two British Grand Slam champions on court at the same time. But both were about to put fans through the ringer. The US Open champion got off to a flyer, breaking opponent Danka Kovinic early. But soon, Emma Raducanu was in trouble with blisters on her racket hand. A set down, and Raducanu's only real weapon now was her backhand. She was smiling, but winning the second set meant playing through the pain.
Ouch.
And in the final set, as her right hand rallied, her backhand faltered, and Kovinic inflicted the final blow.
And she's done it.
There were some people in my team that maybe didn't want me to play, but I wanted to go out there and fight through it.
Just 2 days after playing 5 sets with his metal hip, Andy Murray was slow out of the gate against Japan's Taro Daniel, ranked 120th in the world. And 16 unforced errors from the Scot saw Daniel take the first set with a flourish. Murray had never lost a Grand Slam match to a player ranked as low as Daniel. He had plenty of chances, but the Japanese played the match of his life to win in straight sets. A day to forget then for British tennis. Natalie Perks, BBC News.
Some wonderful blue skies here with Chris Fawkes.
Yes, Sophie, and a stunning weather watcher picture. The only thing that's spoiling it is me, so I'll just be back in a moment. Look at this. This was Cumbria. I mean, you might not have the scenery quite like that, but we have seen skies like that across most parts of the country. However, there have been a few differences. We've seen this line of showers coming down the North Sea. Norfolk and Suffolk being the major recipients of those showers, and the skies, of course, looked rather more threatening as those showers pushed their way through. And there's a few more to come as well overnight tonight. Across this area, across East Anglia, with the showers continuing to run down the North Sea. But otherwise, 1 or 2 showers are possible for the Highlands and the Western Isles, but otherwise we've got clear skies for the majority of the country, and it's going to be a very cold night. The lowest temperatures across the south of England and Wales, where we're looking at lows getting down to about -5, -6 degrees Celsius. So a freezing cold start to the day on Friday. But another day with sparkling winter sunshine to look forward to. Temperatures, though, will stay a little bit below average. Now, across these northwestern areas, generally the cloud will start to thicken up as we go through the day. You might even see a few patches of drizzle for the Western Isles and the Highlands as the day goes by. But for many of us, we'll hang on to dry and bright weather. Temperature around 6 or 7 for many, about 8 or 9 degrees across western areas. Now, heading into the weekend, the area of high pressure that's bringing us settled weather is still around. There's a tendency for the weather to turn a little bit cloudier, but there'll still be the risk of some frost and probably some fog patches as well. The air starts to get a little bit milder as it comes around our area of high pressure, kind of recirculating, if you like. So for Saturday, a bit more in the way of cloud generally, but particularly so across western areas, a few mist and fog patches around coast and hills. Bit of rain for western Scotland, but otherwise it's a dry picture. Still quite chilly across eastern areas, but otherwise turning quite mild in the northwest. Sophie.
Chris, thank you. And that's all from the BBC News at 6. It's goodbye from us.